Hi there, this is Wayne Daley, founder and president of Man Tucson Ministries, and I'm introducing a new segment. I want to call it the Daily Honor Roll. It's just a time to honor men who've had an impact in my life, mostly men who are still alive, but we're going to start off this show, this segment, with the man well, we're going to start off with my dad, and he passed away in 1989. In fact, the theme music that I opened the show with was from the Vegas television show from 1980. Actually, it was 79 through 82, and my dad worked on that show. But I'll get to that. My father's name was William Daley Jr., and I really don't know too much about my dad, about his childhood. I know he was born in New York. He came from Queens out to the West Coast. And that's really all I know. I didn't have an opportunity to know my grandfather very much, so I didn't get the stories about my dad growing up as a kid. My grandfather passed away before I was born. My dad was kind of closed off about his history. My mother wasn't so much. She told me a little bit about my dad, and what little bit I learned from her, and what little bit I know from that time, from what my mom shared, is basically it's not important to who he was for me in my life. Who my dad, what he taught me about being a man. My dad taught me a lot, even though my dad struggled with substance abuse. My dad struggled with alcohol. He fought that battle until the very end. Anyway, my dad, he fathered two sons. He had myself and my brother Bill, and Bill Daley III is my older brother, and he's 4 years older than me. And my earliest memories of hanging out with my dad, he would take us to Dodger games, and I was real small. You know, I wasn't the biggest baseball fan. I know there are some of you out there that may listen to this are scratching your head, not really understanding how that happens, but I enjoyed being with my dad, not necessarily at the park. I never learned how to keep score. I was more interested in getting a hot dog and hanging out and talking. My dad was very much into the baseball game, and so my older brother and he would bond a little bit more at the baseball games than I would. I'd hang out with my stepmother, Kathleen. We called her Kay. But I have some pictures tucked away somewhere of me in the parking lot, being all of 3 foot nothing, standing next to our Dodge Dart in the parking lot with my brother who towered over me. He's 4 years older than me. And I really didn't grow very much when I was a kid. The other memories I have of hanging out with William Daley Jr., my dad would take me pretty much everywhere he went. My parents got divorced when I was 4 years old. So that was 1969. And my dad would come and visit us. I remember him coming to see us on a rainy night, just to visit with us for a few minutes in the car. My mom would drive out to meet him wherever he was working. He'd come run over and talk to us and hang out with us for a minute. My memories from before the time when my parents were together are, to be perfectly honest with you, they're not good. They would fight. You know, I remember one evening specifically, I was in the master bedroom. I assume it was the master bedroom in my memory because there was a TV in there, and that wasn't too common for the 60s, kids, if you're listening. But I was in that bedroom with my brother, and I can hear the crashing and smashing in the other room. And my parents didn't fight fair. There was no boundaries, and becoming physical with each other was acceptable in our home. So, from what I remember, again, I was only 4 years old, or even younger. Right about that same time, I also remember getting sick, which probably added to the stress on my parents, not being able to communicate well, fighting unfair. I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. I had a walnut-sized brain tumor pressing on my pituitary gland. I had to go in for brain surgery, where I was given a 50-50 chance to live. I do remember my dad coming around and visiting me in the hospital a couple of times. My dad wasn't really good around sick people. He didn't know. My dad was a fixer, and if he couldn't fix it, he didn't want to be around it. So visiting people in the hospital wasn't his big thing. visiting people who were sick, not in his wheelhouse, not one of his strengths. But he did come to see me, in the hospital, and I do remember him visiting, and I remember him making me laugh. He snuck in hamburgers, and we had hamburgers one day. That was a lot of fun. And he would ask me if the nurses were, flirting with me, and he always had a way of making me laugh. He always told me he loved me. I remember that much about my dad. And that's something I try to do to my own son. I always want my son to know how much I love him and how proud I am of him. I'm not proud of him because what he accomplishes. I'm proud of him because of the heart he has. And that's what my dad always my dad always imparted to me, or at least I felt it. We didn't talk like that. The one thing my dad taught me is to have real conversations with my son. My dad was a great man. And I'm very blessed to have him to have had him, to have been able to share time with him as a father, as a son, between a father and a son. Some of the other times of hanging out with my dad, he would always, like I said, he would take me everywhere, and we'd spend weekends together. And he lived in Hollywood because he worked for the studios. He worked on television and motion picture back in the 70s and 80s. Even before that, but of course, like I said, don't have too many memories of him from when I was younger. But after the divorce, when I would go to visit him, he worked at Samuel Goldwyn Studios, and that was on Santa Monica Boulevard. Right now, the studio has been renamed The Lot. And basically, if you were to be at the corner of Santa Monica Boulevard and Formosa, and you travel south on Formosa, there is an entrance to the studio. That'll be on your right side, and that's the gate I remember going in with my dad. I mean, so many times when we were kids. When I was a kid visiting, we would go to the studio. We would go to the studio either to go visit my stepmom, Kay, because she worked there too, or we would go because he had to go do something. Not sure. But that's where I went and I met Buddy Epson there. The guy who was Barnaby Jones, who was the grandpa on the Beverly Hillbillies. I got to walk around the set of Barnaby Jones, the offices that you would see in the television show. I got to walk around the set of Ironsides. I got to, walk around the set of Cannon. I got to meet actors. I've been meeting actors since I was 4 years old, and it kind of loses its luster. You kind of stop being starstruck after a while, and because after all, they're just people. So my like I said, my dad would after we went to the studio, we would either go to the Formosa for lunch. The Formosa is actually still there. The Formosa is on the corner of Santa Monica and Formosa. It's right across the street from the studio, and it's a very dark place. From what I remember being just crimson, blood red building, and they had the padded doors, and it almost had like an airlock type of system. You open the outside door, you'd step in, and then you'd open the interior door, and you step into this dark, smoky restaurant with heavy curtains, with plush padded booths, with pictures of stars all over the wall, and a bar. It's basically a bar, but they served food, so we would go in there for lunch and dinner sometimes. My dad would also take me to what was affectionately, or actually it wasn't affectionately, it was literally named Stage 9. It wasn't a stage on the lot, though. It was a bar just on the other side. It was in the Boys Market parking lot. It was on the other side, and I don't remember the street name because the street name isn't the restaurant name. And Stage 9, my Uncle Maury, who is not my uncle, but, my dad had friends who I called him Uncle Maury and Uncle Doug, Uncle Roland. Those are the three names I remember the most. And my dad would go in to Maury's or Stage 9 and have a beer, and then he would give me a handful of quarters and tell me to go shoot pool. And Uncle Doug would come over, or one of the other guys that my dad trusted there at the bar. I assume he trusted him. I hope he knew him. Everything was fine, so I guess I was okay. But we would go over and we'd shoot pool, and and that I learned how to play pool in a bar when I was probably 11 or 12. He wasn't taking me in there when I was 4. Not that I can remember, but who knows? Could have happened. And my dad always kept a close eye on me. I was never out of his sight. I don't ever remember getting lost when I was with my dad. I don't ever remember not feeling safe when I was with my dad. Even when he would drink to excess, I never felt unsafe. And I'll get that. Those are stories for later on, but I'm going to get to that. I followed my dad around. What I mean by that is when he changed shows. Canon was eventually canceled, and that was very early in the 70s. My dad also worked on a show called Soap. It was the first show. It was actually where Billy Crystal was discovered. Billy Crystal was the first openly gay character on a television series. And he never took me to that set, and I never got to go there. And actually, my dad, my dad didn't allow us to watch the show because it was on late at night, and the content was risque. And and I was young. I was very young. So he encouraged my mom and encouraged us to not watch the show. Of course, I did watch the show. I had a TV in my room, so I would stay up late and I would watch the show. And for better or worse, I'm an okay person now. But I just wanted to see what my dad was doing. I wanted to have that connection to my father. I wanted to be aware of where he was. I wanted to see his name on the screen. Whenever I saw my dad's name on the screen, it was always a big thrill for me. It's the same thing for my brother. My brother Bill, Bill Daley III, has not really followed in Dad's footsteps. Dad was a property master, which means anything you see that the actors handle with their hands, guns, baseball bats, anything, glasses. He was in charge of making sure that stuff was not only at the set, but that it was functioning to the up to the specification what the shot required. My brother's a set builder, so now my brother has gone into working for the studios, and it's weird. It's a closed community. People know people's names, and my brother's run into people who actually knew my dad and had conversations with him, which I think is very cool. I had that experience as well. My dad, after he worked on Soap, he worked, the next thing I remember, he worked on a movie called Fast Break. And that was with Gabe Kaplan and Harold Sylvester. And that was in about ninth grade, going into 10th grade, 1979. And they shot at the campus of CSUN, or Cal State University, Northridge. And we went down to go see my dad. We went down and had food off of the catering trucks, off craft services. And we got to hang out with my dad, and I got to meet Gabe Kaplan, and I got to meet Harold Sylvester, and I got to meet the sound guy, and I got to hang out with the sound guy while they were shooting in the gymnasium. I got up front row, and I remember I had friends from school who were in the crowd. It was they were playing basketball games, and they had people come down to be in the crowd, and I had friends in the crowd. And I remember how cool it was that I didn't have to sit in the stands. I got to sit down on the floor with the crew while the movie was being made. That was a lot of fun. That was kind of cool. It was a talking point for me and my friends. My dad also, he went to work on a TV show called Vegas with Robert Urich, and that was not too long after Fast Break. And that really, when he went to work on Vegas, he lived in Vegas. Because the show was actually filmed in Las Vegas. And when he went to live in Vegas, I actually got to go stay with him for quite a few weeks. I think it was a couple months. I don't really remember how long it was. I know it was over summer. I got to stay with him over summer because I remember that I got to watch fireworks from the balcony of the apartments that we lived in because we had a view from just near the airport looking north. We could see the whole sky, so we didn't have to go anywhere to see fireworks. We got to see them from the balcony. I also remember getting to hang out with Robert Urich, my friend that I used to live across the street from when I was a kid, and Matt. He came out, and we got to go down to the set and sit in the Thunderbird and get our picture taken in the T-Bird, the convertible T-Bird, the signature car for Dan Tana. That's the first place I ever met and talked to a stuntman. His name was Richard Zeiker, or Dick Zeiker. I remember my dad had a picture in his house of a stunt that Dick Zyker did. It was like a car that hit a half ramp and was doing a flip and exploded. And the picture was with it upside down, bursting into flames. And Dick Zyker had signed it saying, "Now we're having fun. Love you, Bill." That was another thing about my dad. My dad, everybody loved my dad. Everywhere we went, people knew my dad. And not because of what he could do for them, but because of how he treated them. He was transparent. He was who he was in front of everybody. He never pretended to be something he's not. And I try to be that man. I try to live up to the standard that my dad set with that. After Vegas, it was funny, but before we get too far into this, that movie Fast Break, where I met Harold Sylvester, I was actually, this is not too long back. This is probably 1996 or 97, and my dad passed away in 89. My dad had been gone for several years. I was living in Studio City. I was living on Vineland, south of Ventura Boulevard, and right around the corner, walking distance, which is a blessing and a curse when you're in your mid-20s and you favor drinking. I was in walking distance to a neighborhood bar called Residuals, and a lot of actors would hang out in there. It had a Residuals. The S was a dollar sign. It was it was an industry bar, as they term it. And since I lived around the corner, I would hang out there, a couple 3 nights a week. If I had nothing going on. Man, that sounds terrible to say that, 3 nights a week. Anyway, I was in there having some beers. They had karaoke. I had friends, friends from the neighborhood that would be in there. And in walks in Harold Sylvester, who was in the Fast Break movie. And I recognized him. And, of course, he didn't recognize me. This is, he's meeting me 15 years, or so later after he met me as a little boy, as a young man. And he came in and he sat down at the bar. And I sent him I got the bartender's attention. I said, whatever he's drinking, please let me buy his first round. And, of course, the bartender goes back down. And he, his eyes roll. He's like, he's looking around. Who's this? Male or female? Who's hitting on me? And it's a big joke, I guess, in that bar. Because then he came down. He sat next to me. He's like, well, I want to thank you for the beer. He goes, why? Why is it? Why are you buying me a drink? Why are you sending me a drink? I just need to know what's the gig. And I explained to him, I said that I'd met him on the set of Fast Break, that my dad was Bill Daley, who was the property master, and he lit up like Christmas. Oh, yeah, I remember Bill Daley, yeah. Oh, my gosh, that guy, and went on and on about the character of my dad and how much fun he was and how dependable and reliable and whatever else he was going to say. And, you remember, he's like, well, how is your dad doing? And I remember I said, well, I'm sorry, he passed away. He passed away in December of '89. And he's, oh man, he was deep. He was honestly, he goes, I'm really sorry. He goes, I really liked your dad. Your dad was a good man. And we sat there and we had a beer, and we chatted about being in the industry, and we talked a little bit about my dad, and it was good. It was kind of nice. It was several years after my father had passed away. Like I said, my father passed away in '89. This was probably around '95, '96. So it was nice to run into and have a contact with an outside source about my dad. But I really didn't learn anything about my dad from Harold that I didn't already know. One of the things I remember about my dad, the character of my dad, he would drive us home. Well, he'd pick us up. We lived in the valley. He lived in Hollywood. He'd pick us up. We'd drive home. We'd drive back to his apartment. And I always remember driving out to his apartment and seeing the cross on the mountain in the Hollywood Hills. I always knew that's when I was getting close. And even still today, if I was to drive by there, there's a certain feeling I get about going over the hill into Hollywood from the valley and seeing that cross. For years after my dad passed away, before I moved to Tucson, I would drive down there. I would drive by that cross, which has a very significant feeling for me. It's a feeling of home. I drive by the American Legion Hall, which is also right there as you're coming over Hollywood Boulevard. That's a different story. That's a different time, for a different honoring of a different man, for several men actually. But that cross, and then going home, we always had Pioneer chicken Sunday night before he'd take us home. You know, I don't know if anybody remembers Pioneer Chicken. It was on Santa Monica Boulevard. If you remember, if you were a kid of the 80s and you remember El DeBarge, you know, the Rhythm of the Night, they filmed the video outside of the Pioneer Chicken stand. Anyway, you know, I'm getting off on a tyrant. My dad was a good man. I just remember one weekend he was late to pick us up. Now my mom remarried. She was married to a man, Ron, who was my stepdad. And that's another honor roll episode as well, because Ron was a good stepdad. He stepped in when he needed to step in. On a particular weekend, Ron's children were visiting. We were still living in an apartment on Noble Avenue in Panorama City, California, and Ron's kids, Rhonda and Greg, his daughter and his son, were visiting. And Ron had said, "Well, I'm going to take my kids horseback riding." And my dad had not shown up yet to pick up Bill, my brother Billy, and me. And I was devastated. He was supposed to be there, we'll just say 10 a.m., and here it is getting close to noon, and my dad, no call, no show at this point. And as I said, my dad struggled with alcohol. And that has taught me a lot. My dad was a great man. The single greatest man after Jesus Christ to walk this planet was William Daley Jr. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The man taught me everything that I needed to know about being a man. Well, not everything. I needed to learn a lot of things on my own, but he did the best he could with what he had. Anyway, back to the story. My dad, he didn't show up when he said he'd show up. I was getting visibly upset, as any young man will do. And I mean, I was still young. This is probably 8 years old, 7 years old. And Ron, he decides to step in and say, okay, well, Billy and Wayne can go horseback riding with me and Greg and Rhonda. We can all go as a family. We'll just all go horseback riding. And as we were walking out, I mean, literally, as we were walking towards the door to leave, I can still see the apartment, the dark curtains, the front door off in the far left corner was the front door of this apartment building, or of our apartment. And as we're walking towards the door, there's a knock, and it opens, and it's my dad. Now, I'm 8 years old, we'll just say, and it's my dad, and I'm elated, and I'm upset because now I wanted to go horseback riding, and my dad's there, and I want to go with my dad, and I'm torn, and I believe I'm in tears, to be honest with you. I was an emotional child. I'm not ashamed to say it. I cry today. I'm 48 years old. Big deal. So I'm in tears, and I remember my dad kneeling down in front of me, and my dad had he had a very acne runs bad in our family, and he had a cracked face. He's a very strong man, very strong face, strong chin, and he's face to face with me, not in an intimidating way, but he's down at my level. He didn't talk down to me. He got down on his knees and he looked me in the eyes. He said, "Son," he goes, "I'm late." He goes, "This is my fault." He goes, "I don't want you to be upset. You made other plans. I'm not here." He goes, "I tell you what, if you want to go horseback riding, you go horseback riding, and I'm going to wait right here for you. I will be here when you get back." Dude, I can't tell you. I mean, even today, that just the fact that he would do that's a very emotional moment for me. And I know I didn't go horseback riding. I don't remember horseback riding, but I do remember my dad doing that. And I know that I did not choose horseback riding. I chose to spend time with my dad. That was the man I had. I remember making meatloaf with him. My dad made the most remarkable meatloaf ever on any planet. He was a remarkable cook. He had a bit of a wicked sense of humor, albeit inappropriate. Probably not age appropriate for who I was, but it helped shape and define my wit and my character. I like to think that I'm witty and funny, and sometimes I have to curb that because my response is not always age appropriate. My dad had an aneurysm, a brain aneurysm, mid-'80s. We'll say it was after I was out of high school. that ended his career. He then was living in a house in Lake Los Angeles, California, which is basically Palmdale. You know, it's out in the Antelope Valley. It's a good 45 minutes away from the valley. And after living with him in Vegas, that's where our relationship really started to take off. We really started to really bond and speak more about real things together. And he was invested in helping me in my life. He took me, he let me use his car for the driving test, let me use his car to go to the prom. You know, he would always be there. I'd go, one time I cut school. You know, I can now admit this. Joe Mignot and I rode out on Joe's motorcycle out to Santa Monica Beach on his motorcycle, and on the way home we stopped at my dad's apartment to visit with him. So I lived with my dad in Lake Los Angeles. And this is the last home that he knew. He lived in the middle of the desert, essentially by himself. His wife at the time, he had divorced Kay a while back and remarried Jane. I don't have any contact with Jane at this point. I don't know if she's alive or has passed away. After my dad passed away, the relationship severed. She loved my dad. I don't have any doubt about that, but she really didn't want to have anything to do with us, my brother and I. But my dad passed away. He left out of the city when he couldn't work anymore, and still smoking. The doctors told him he couldn't drink anymore. He wasn't giving up. He wasn't going out without a fight. But my father ended his fight with emphysema complications from brain aneurysm on December 9th of 1989, and that was 3 months after my son Brendan was born. You know, I have one picture of my dad holding my son, and I'm glad to have that picture. My dad, again, was the greatest man. I couldn't honor him anymore. He taught me a lot by not even teaching me how to be a father, or by teaching me or doing it wrong. He taught me what it shouldn't look like, and I can't thank him enough for at least being in my life, being an imperfect man in my life, so that I have some kind of standard or measure to know how to be a better father to my son. My father enabled my son to have a father that's more invested in his life. And for that, William Daley Jr., I salute you, I honor you, I love you. I will never, ever forget you. No one will ever speak ill of you in my presence. Thank you, Dad. Thank you for loving me, and thank you for being proud of me, and thank you for showing me what a man needs to be. So there you have it, the Daily Honor Roll for July 22nd of 2013. My attempt to honor my father, William Daley Jr., for all he was and continues to be for me to this day. I want to thank you for spending this time with me. I want to thank you for your support for Man Tucson Ministries, your support for me, Wayne Daley, for all that I'm attempting to do, attempting to be what God has called me to be. Remember, if you have a dad, he's not perfect. He is just a man, and he's broken and needs grace and mercy the same as you do. If he's not in your life, find a man who will be in your life. I had the benefit of having two wonderful men, both who fathered me, both who taught me things. Actually, in the next Daily Honor Roll, we'll probably honor Ronald Conroe, who was my stepfather. But at this time, I'd like to say thank you again. God bless you, and I hope you have a very, very wonderful day. Take your soul back home to Dixie. I sang Dixie as he died. People just walked on by as I cried. The bottle had robbed him of all his
rebel pride. So I sang Dixie